California Murphy, right?
Yeah, because Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
It's the gang. Well, I'm glad you guys are here. I am excited to be here. You guys, how many of you, put your hand up if you're not from the state, if you're not currently residing or from the state of Ohio? Just you. So where did you travel from?
Indiana.
Indiana. How long of a drive? Or was
like
it
2 hours.
2 hours? Really? So I can get to Indiana from right here in 2 hours. What part of Indiana can I get to? I don't want to do it today, but
we live like in the suburbs of Indianapolis, so.
All right, maybe there's probably a lot of cool things.
70.
Huh. So it is to the west of us, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. I'll consider that. I'm coming back here. We're doing GalaxyCon Columbus in December, so I'll be back here. Maybe I'll do a 2-hour, 4-hour round trip. Go out and see Indianapolis. Do that on the day before the con starts. My name's Guy Hutchinson. I write books. I've written a best-selling book called Bibbidi Boozidi Book, which is Cocktails from Disney World. When it was on the bestseller charts, it made me so happy because on Amazon, their best-selling travel and tourism guides, number one was this book I wrote about getting drunk at Disney, and number 2 was the Zagat Guide to Traveling, and number 3 was Fodor's Guide to the Fine Dining of the World. And I was these people have offices with groups of people, and I just went to restaurants and asked the bartender how he made that drink and then tried to make it at home and got really hammered. That's literally different process. But so I also wrote a book for Sesame Place, which is the Sesame Street theme park in Pennsylvania, and I worked directly with the park to write that. I do a show with Dana Snyder from Aqua Teen Hunger Force. We do a show called Drunk on Disney. We're both ridiculous Disney nerds, so we both love it way more than any grown person should, but I think that's why it's there. And I also have a YouTube channel called Pointless Nostalgia. I do a new video every day at 2 o'clock. So please, please, please subscribe. If you go on today at 2, you'll see the video I shot yesterday. So Friday here at the convention, you'll see the whole day. I do the commentary for the FSCW wrestling as well. So, and that's tonight at 5 o'clock. And you guys should at least pass by and look at some of it. It's a lot of fun. And I get to go through the curtain and down the ramp like I'm the ultimate warrior. It's awesome. It really is. So we're going to talk about how, you see the arrow going either way, but really we're just going from Disneyland, we're going to Orlando. And the idea behind this panel is I'm going to show you the process that Disney went through to go over to the, what do they call that? The Gold Coast, I think, is this one. I think this is the Sun Belt over here. So let's start out. We got Walt Disney. Here he is, enjoying a teacup, just having a good life. When the park opened at Disneyland, 1950s, this is the Mickey and this is the Donald Duck. Man, they just, well, first of all, the first thing that must be addressed is the scars on Mickey's upper lip. Back then, you couldn't mold foam rubber. Today you can mold it very well, but they didn't have a way to do that, so they had to just cut a slit in it and then spread it apart. That was the only way you could shape this. And these costumes were not designed for the park. They were designed for Ice Capades, which was like a traveling show. Would go to every area, go to your local civic center, and you go see a bunch of different things. You'd be like, oh, here's a lady from the Olympics, and she's going to do some moves. And then here's Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse, and they'll do some silly stuff. And so if you look at their costumes, even their shoes, they had taken the blades off the ice skates and then kind of taped the shoes up, and just looked weird. But that was opening day Disneyland. If you ever get a chance, there is an entire TV special about it, which you can find on YouTube. And boy, everything went wrong. I mean, everything went wrong. Walt had built the park in such a short amount of time. It was like well under a year. And they had to meet this deadline to open it. And so they had poured the asphalt not far before that. So it was a hot day. And they said that the women's high heels were kind of sinking into the to the asphalt. They had a gas leak at Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. They just had. There's always a lot of problems. They had a problem with tickets where counterfeit tickets were being used, so way more people showed up than were supposed to be there. I talked to the people from Sesame Place about their opening day, and they had relatively similar stories. They said that they did like an opening for the press, and that was like at 9 a.m., and then for the public it was going to be at 11. And they said the guy who was the general manager said, I got a call over the radio, and they said, you need to come to the front gate right now. And he goes, why? What's happening? He says, people are lifting their children up and lowering them over the fence so they can get into the park early. People go crazy at the opening of theme parks, and it's a recipe for a disaster. A lot of people after that first day was like, this is a mistake. Walt's, this thing's going to go bankrupt. Walt's lost his mind. But of course, it became such a huge hit. I love this picture, by the way, because it's such a great old picture. You see a lot of stuff you don't see anymore. You see the ship there. You see the Skyway, which I used to love those Skyway gondolas, and just like the whole atmosphere. Everything looked so different then. This is Adventureland. And then the other thing that's interesting about when they built Disneyland was the Disneyland Hotel was not owned by the Disney company. So Disney, they didn't know how to make a theme park, let alone a hotel. They'd never been in the hotel business, and so they were doing their first chance at making a theme park after being filmmakers, and they were taking what they knew and using it on that. But they were like, I don't think we're ready to open a hotel. So they went to Jack Rather, and he was a TV producer, and they talked to him. He had produced like Lassie, and his wife, Bonita Granville, was an actress, and she was on the Lone Ranger series. And they went to Jack, and Jack had a lot of money and had done stuff like this. So Jack was like, yeah, I'll open your hotel. So he made the Disneyland Hotel, and he owned it for a very long time, which is fun because in the old days, up until Disney finally purchased it from them, you could go to the Disneyland Hotel and there would be like a brochure in your room for like Universal and SeaWorld, because it was not a hotel owned by Disney. But they had that monorail that would take you over to the park. Everything there has changed a lot. The Disneyland Hotel, though, is a gem. If you ever get a chance, it's a beautiful hotel. After this was 1955. Disneyland opens. They open the Disneyland Hotel later. Monorail comes even later than that. But in between this, there was the 1964 World's Fair. And Walt Disney designed a bunch of attractions. I'm going to tell you some of the stories that I've heard about this. The thing about stories about Walt Disney is Walt had a habit of embellishing his stories. So I don't know how true all of these are, but I've heard these stories. I believe there's some truth to them. We're going to talk about the different attractions. I'll first tell you a quick story about this. So he's in front of the model of It's a Small World, and in front of that is the Tower of the Four Winds, which was this whimsical, beautiful tower that they had put out there, and it had these things that would spin around. And the World's Fair was very much like today's theme parks. They had tons of attractions. Like the 1964 World's Fair had a Ferris wheel that was a giant tire that was sponsored by like Uniroyal. And so you'd get in this giant tire and you'd go around, and it was like, this is the World's Fair. I think the tire, by the way, is in Detroit on the side of the road. It's like like where Uniroyal Tires is. They have that tire. They filled in the spots where the little buckets used to be that would go around the Ferris wheel. But I feel like if we all went over there, we could probably get that thing started up. We could probably peel back a layer of plastic and climb in. Walt, It's a Small World was not on his agenda. He had attractions he was building, and we'll talk about each of those. But It's a Small World was one where they didn't go to Walt. They went to like Walt's here in the company at the very top, and they went to a guy like here, like real close to where Walt is. And the guy was a big executive, and they said, hey, we are looking to do an attraction with Pepsi and I think it was the United Way, but it was a children's charity. They said, we have this children's charity and Pepsi, and we want to do some kind of attraction that Pepsi's going to sponsor and pay for, and it'll be at the show. And they said, you know what, we're already working on multiple attractions for this. We just don't have the staffing to do this. We don't have, we just don't have it. We can't do this for you. And he dismissed the idea, never told Walt. So then Walt heard about this, and the guys that are close to him say that had he been told about it in the beginning, he would have turned it down. But because he wasn't told about it, he was furious that it was turned down without his permission. And so Walt said, I love the children. I'm going to definitely do this. I'm going to make this attraction. We could do this. So he drew this building on his desk, and he brought in the Sherman Brothers, and he said, we'll do a boat ride. They'll come in here. It'll go around here. It'll come over here. It'll go out here. You just put the children of the world. We'll put animatronics of them, and the Sherman Brothers, who wrote the It's a Small World song and a ton of other Disney songs. He said, I need you guys to make a medley of all of the national anthems of the world. So you take every national anthem and have them go together as one big song, so like a unification of everybody. And so they did, and they said it sounded horrifying. It was the most horrifying, out of pitch, horrible song ever created. So the Sherman Brothers said, okay, we need to rethink this, and they came up with It's a Small World. They were like, this is a beautiful song. It's about everybody being together, and they loved the song. And so they were in the car riding with Walt, and they were riding over to meet with the executives, and it was UNICEF, by the way, was the children's charity. They were going over to meet with the executives from UNICEF, and the Sherman Brothers, they said, Walt, we were talking, and we decided we're going to donate the proceeds from this song that we wrote, this It's a Small World song. We'll just donate all the residuals to UNICEF and let them have, all the money from that. And they said, Walt slammed on the brakes and turned around and said, look, guys, I love UNICEF and I do everything for the children, but this song is going to send your children through college. Don't you dare give them the rights to this song. And so they kept that. The other attractions that they did, they had Progress Land, which was the Carousel of Progress. So this was sponsored by GE. There is a version of the Carousel of Progress in Walt Disney World in Florida. It's awesome. It's probably the greatest thing that you'll ever see in your life if you haven't. It's robots telling you about the history of the stove. I'm a huge fan of it. And my son is 12, and he don't like it anymore, right? Like when he was very little, I was able to, get him to go in and see it. And then I remember one time we go in, and he goes like, "Is this the robot guy who just talks the whole time?" And I was like, "This is a ride." And he's like, "Is it a ride?" And then we get in, and he's like, "This is the robot guy who talks." I was like, "Yeah, but it's a ride because we're rotating." And so if we're moving and we're seated, that's a carousel. This is a carousel of progress. Stages are moving, we're moving. This is a ride. And so now he never falls for it. So I don't get to go as much as I like. But the Carousel of Progress debuted there. It was a different version. They definitely had a different ending, but all the scenes were a little different. But essentially the theme and the concept was the same. They actually, the song that's on now, that if you go to it today, it's There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. That's the song that they played at the World's Fair. But when they brought it to Florida, first they brought it out to Disneyland, then the Florida parks, when they opened, they brought it there. And when they did, the executives from GE sat down and watched it again. And they listened, There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. And the executive was like, No, there's not. No, we don't want people buying their new GE oven tomorrow. We want them to know that they need to buy it right now. Now is the time to buy your GE oven, not tomorrow. So they went to the Sherman Brothers and they said, we need a new song for this. And so they wrote a new song, which appeared in the ride for probably 10, 15 years, which went, now is the time, now is the best time, now is the best time of your life. And it was just to tell you that you didn't want to wait till tomorrow to buy your GE oven. You needed to buy it right away. GE eventually stopped sponsoring the attraction. Disney doesn't do sponsored attractions as much as they used to. They used to really get away with their theme park being like, we'll let Exxon pay for this attraction. And then, you'd go on the Universe of Energy and Exxon would be like, we hope that you remember that Exxon is great. Like the attraction would tell you the greatness of Epcot or Exxon at Epcot. But this one, it was all about General Electric stoves, and it still is, but they've kind of taken that back a little bit, and they put the original song back, so we can all wait a day or two to buy our new stove. So this is, you can see the boats here. This is the, you can see Miss Pepsi there at the opening of It's a Small World, which is pretty cool. I mentioned this Tower of the Four Winds. There it is. That's the model of it. They made a giant version of it. This is one of the designers. You can just see how exhausted, I think it's Raleigh Crump. You can see how exhausted he is, just tired as can be. He's like, okay, Walt, I'll be in your silly special. Let's get on the road. I got to build 50 other things by the end of the day, because apparently you've said yes to Pepsi. Here's a look at the Carousel of Progress in the early days. Now, I mentioned how some of the stories aren't exactly true. Walt was a storyteller, and he did a special about the Carousel of Progress on television where he showed how it was controlled by robotic arms and did this whole contraption. This was all fake. None of this was real. Like, this is not how they programmed them. If they showed how they really programmed them, it would have been a very boring special. So instead, Walt put a guy in a robo costume, and he's like, see, this is how we program robots. They also had this map of Progress Land, and somebody put this online. I thought this was really neat. If you look at the section that's circled there, if you ride the People Mover in Florida, you see that section of this thing, but you can see it goes way out beyond that in the back and way in the front and to the side. So it, like, the actual map was way bigger, and they just couldn't display all of it. But they moved It's a Small World over to Disneyland, and then they eventually copied it for Florida. They moved the other ride, which is called the Ford's Magic Skyway, which was you'd sit in a Ford car. It was a really good advertisement. You sat in a Ford car, and it slowly took you through these dioramas of the Grand Canyon and other things. And that stuff is on the Disneyland train ride today. And the mechanism that the Ford Magic Skyway worked on became the People Mover. Walt wanted to bring it as the Ford Magic Skyway to Disneyland. He was like, you guys, every year when you put out new cars, we'll put the new cars on the track. People will sit in your brand new car, and they'll be like, oh, I need to buy this new Ford. But Ford didn't want to go for it. So he was like, well, then they won't be Fords anymore. That was, that's why they became the vehicles that they are today. I want to give you guys an idea about Disneyland, about the size of it and the changes to it. So this is a side-by-side. The one on the left, that's 1955, and you can see this area up here. This is Disneyland, this like triangular park. And then in front of it, you have your giant parking lot. Today, you can see, now this picture is over 10 years old, but this gives you an idea of what they've done. They've kind of grown out in every direction, pushed to the borders everywhere they can. I believe this corner, there is the world's most highest revenue 7-Eleven. So Disney can't buy this one plot of land because the 7-Eleven that's on it makes more money than any other 7-Eleven in the world. But Disney has tried to purchase as much of that land. Anytime there's a hotel around there or anything that's struggling, Walt's like, oh, I would like to, not Walt now, but the company is like, we'd like to buy that. And, they come in and buy it. The thing about it was Walt didn't have the ability to purchase all the land around it. And that was the idea, the dream he had for Florida was he wanted to purchase all the land around his parks so people couldn't build their 7-Eleven, their hotel or anything else. As you know, they are in the hotel business. They're in any business today. But at that time, they didn't know how to make hotels, so they hired people to make their hotel. And then there were a lot of other hotels you could stay at. And to this day, you can stay within very close walking distance to Disneyland in a hotel that has nothing to do with them. You can, find lots of discount motels. So today, they actually have the second park, Disney's California Adventure. You can see is at the bottom. So that's where the parking lot used to be, and now they have this massive parking garage. But you can see that now Disney, way bigger place, way way more expanded, but they can't expand much more there. They've actually talked about over the years, they had this idea for Westcott, their version of Epcot, and Disney for a while owned land in Long Beach because the Disneyland Hotel, when the Rather Corporation sold it to Disney, they sold the rest of their holdings, which included, if you've ever seen the movie The Aviator, the Spruce Goose, the actual plane that Howard had made, the real plane, they owned that, and they owned the Queen Mary, which is a classic sailing ship museum. And Disney owned both of them for a short time, and then they've unloaded them, and other people own them now. But Disney also inherited this land in Long Beach, and they thought about building parks out there because they couldn't build any more here. And the better idea, though, is kind of to focus on Florida. All right, Walt wanted to move to a new area. So first thing he thought of was Louisiana. So Walt wanted to move to Louisiana with his new park, his Walt Disney World, be located in Louisiana. And what happened was Walt spoke to the governor there and all the different heads of state, heads of departments, government officials. And he said that they were just too difficult to work with, which meant they wouldn't take his money and let him do whatever he wanted. So he said, all right, no Louisiana. So Walt had his plane. This was Walt's plane. It used to be on the backlot tour. They actually restored it recently. Restored is kind of a kind word for it because they've ripped out all the parts that would ever make it fly, and it's not you could never fly this plane again, but they've restored it to where it looks nice and has seats and everything on the inside, and they had it on display at D23. But Walt flew his plane around Florida, and he picked Orlando for a very specific reason. People at that time, it was a very popular tourist destination to go to Florida. And air travel in 1970 was not the same as it is today by any means. The average person didn't fly anywhere near as often as people fly today. And so Walt knew that a lot of people got in their car and they started up in New York, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, and they drove straight down and they went to Miami. So Walt said, let's put a place that's far enough from Miami that people, once they get here, will realize it's too far to keep going all the way to Miami. Let's just stay here. And then he said, I also want to make sure we're inland for two reasons. One, hurricanes will be a little less damaging. Two, I want to also make sure that when people say, oh, we're going to go to the beach, wow, it's real far to get to the beach. Maybe we'll just spend more time at Walt Disney's theme park and attractions here. So he really wanted you to get stuck there. And when he came to Florida, he had this big meeting. It was a big thing because people started, the story is that he was purchasing all this land for just pennies. You know, he's purchasing it under all these different names. And then people got hip to it and they're like, I think Disney's purchasing this land. I think they're making another Disneyland here. So Walt did this press conference, came out, said, yes, I'm the one buying the land. The rest of the land became a little bit more expensive at that point. And Walt was being welcomed by all these other places. There were places that were in Florida already, Parrot Jungle, there was Monkey Jungle, there was the Miami Seaquarium, there was, what was the one? There was one with ladies with big dresses, Cypress Gardens. They had these ladies with these big, beautiful dresses. The ones that go out like 8 feet. You know, like those gorgeous old-timey dresses. That was an attraction. Like you'd go to a theme park, and a big part of it was looking at ladies in big dresses. So, there's a fly now. But you'd go to all these different places that were in Florida, and all of them welcomed Walt. They were like, this is going to be so great. This is going to be the best time ever. All these people are coming down to Florida, and they're going to come to our place and Walt Disney World. And then Walt started being like, I think I'll build all my own hotels, and maybe I'll make it real difficult for you to leave. You know, and even like eventually, which they've now stopped, but they would just bus you from the airport right to, they were like, we're going to make sure you don't even notice that there's a Florida here. We just want you to come right to Walt Disney World. They started like a partnership. Man, this fly is annoying. He likes me though. They started a partnership with I think it was Delta, and like they'd have Disney characters at the airport. They were like, "Come on, look, hey, and you go that way." You know, like Mickey Mouse would be like, "Don't you dare rent a car. You go, you take a cab and you get right to our park." Yes. All right, so here's Walt. This is Walt in front of a map pointing. He's like, I'm going to build it here. So I mentioned the other attractions. Let me show you some of the kind of stuff that you would see in Florida. Weeki Wachee Springs. I've been to this place. It's still there, but this was a big tourist attraction. They had, originally they just started with girls in bathing suits that would swim, and you'd look at them from the top, and they were like, we got girls in bathing suits. And then they were like, well, maybe we could do more than that. So they put them in mermaid tails, and they gave them these tubes. They have these tubes that they could breathe through, and they do entire shows out there, and it's great. Weeki Wachee Springs is wonderful, and I loved when I went there. It's in the town of Weeki Wachee, which is the reason for the name. When I went there, I had seen a special where Don Knotts had been there because Incredible Mr. Limpet, they had done the premiere there. And so I got there and I wanted to sit. I was like, I'm going to sit where Don Knotts sat. And I get in, and there's like 4 people in the theater. And they're all sitting right where Don Knotts was sitting. And I was like, man, you people. And so I'm sitting there, I'm trying to think of a reason. And then I waited till the seats filled up. So I stood in the back, waited till, because I'm a maniac. Because this was important to me. And so then I was like, hey, can I squeeze in here? And they're, oh, yeah. So me and my wife squeezed in. And I was like, my wife sat down first. I'm like, you move, because that's the Don Knotts seat. I'm sitting there. You sit next to the Don. I'm in the Don Knotts seat. But I liked at the beginning of the show, they show a video from the mayor of Weeki Wachee. And she says, welcome to Weeki Wachee. The Weeki Wachee mermaids have been a long part of our tradition here in this town. And then she gets to the end and she's like, and by the way, I was a mermaid. And she shows a picture from when she was younger. You're like, whoa! Even the mayor's a mermaid. All right. I mentioned Parrot Jungle. There's Parrot Jungle. Here's a picture. I don't know where this was, but this is definitely Florida. So this is what passed for, this is what passed for, kids' rides back then. This is Monkey Jungle. I got a story about Monkey Jungle. When you go in, they say it's the only place where you're in a cage and the monkeys run free. So you go through like this tunnel, and it's like chicken wire or whatever all the way around. So you're fenced in, and you walk in, the monkeys climb all around you. And I went there, I took my kid, and he was a baby, so I was pushing him in the stroller. And it's still there. Monkey Jungle still survived. They're, I'm sure, not as big as they were, in the pre-Disney days. But I'm walking through, and I keep seeing people with umbrellas, and I was like, is it supposed to rain? And then I looked up at the monkeys, and I was like, oh no. But we were all right. We survived. We survived all the way through. I was pushing my kid through at like a breakneck pace. I was like, I'm going to make it out of there. I'd see the monkeys. I'd be like, nope, don't you dare. Not you. Because like the monkeys are all over, and you'd put like food in a little. They give you like sunflower seeds. You put them in a little tray, and the monkey would pull it up from the top. Like the monkeys knew how to pull it up. They'd eat it, drop the tray down. But I didn't want to mess around with that anymore because I didn't have an umbrella. And I saw people with umbrellas. I was worried these monkeys were going to pee on me. So I pushed my kid as fast as I can to the exit. I don't know where the exit is because, you start at the beginning, you push to the end. I get to the end. I pushed him past the line, and I was like, woo! And then I felt the monkey pee on my shoulder. No. Like literally this monkey was like, I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him right. I'll get him right when he thinks he's safe. And so, luckily, though, my kid didn't get it because that was what I was most worried about. Like, I'm pulling the cover over the stroller and everything. I'm like, you don't need to see anything. We don't need. But they had a lot of attractions. They don't have as many as they used to. They used to have a monkey that would go on a space flight in a trash can. They also had Liberace of the Animal World. He would play the piano, just pound on those keys. Here's another. This was, I think, Busch Gardens. They had, like the women would do the pyramid on the water skis. They also had an attraction there, which is called Castaway. This was where people would stay. It was a big, beautiful resort. One of the highlights, and this should show you what a time period it was this guy, Stanley Klim. And Stanley Klim was known as Stanley the Great because every time They would play the Battle of New Orleans on the jukebox. Stanley would stack 3 trays of drinks on his head, grab the cowbells, and walk around the bar playing the cowbells and dancing with everybody there and never spilling a drink. I was reading about, I wanted to find out more about Stanley because, man, what a great story. And I found his obituary. He died in 2015, lived a nice long life. And Stanley, from Castaway, from the Miami resort, had, after that resort closed, which was just after Disney came down there, he worked at other resorts and he would do private parties. And his, I think it was his daughter said, in the 2015, he died in March. And in 2014, in December, he did his last show, right? So he was not sick until the very end of his life. And she said he was hired to do a private party, and they said, and we really like, we saw you at Castaway years ago. And so he said, I know they want me to put the drinks on my head. I know I got to balance the trays on my head. So Stanley went to the garage and practiced for a week just to balance these drinks. At like 87 years old, he had to balance these drinks, play his cowbells, and he played his last show. It was fantastic. And Stanley passed away, and I think he was 86 years old. But Castaway closed down, and that was like a real mecca. And the reason is because even though Miami is a huge tourist destination today, and they probably get more people per year, probably 5 times as many as they used to get. Back then, they were the only, the big game in town. That's where everybody came. You drove all the way down to Miami. Castaway was so big. It was like the size of like 8 hotels. They just had multiple building after building. They had 6 pools. I mean, it was just a massive resort, and it was right on the water. So, all right, here's the land that became Walt Disney World in Florida. Here's some construction photos. You can see them building the castle there. They also had to build the hotels at that time, and Disney did not know how to build hotels, so they had to learn how to do it. They built the rooms for the Contemporary, the A-frame hotel that the monorail goes through, and they built the room separate from the hotel. It's an interesting story, and I'll show you how they did it. But they were making this hotel, and they had these ideas for these different hotels. The Contemporary was one. They were also going to do like the Venetian Resort, which they never made, and I think the other one was called the Oriental Resort, but they were going to do these very themed resorts. And then this Contemporary Resort, they didn't have a theme for it. They didn't know what exactly it was going to be. They knew that you'd be able to see it from Tomorrowland, so they wanted to kind of look futuristic. And they said one day one of the guys was just like, what if the monorail went through it? And they were like, that's it. That's the thing. Like the monorail passing through it is the selling point. So they built it in this A-frame, and they prefabbed the rooms over in the Fort Wilderness area, and then they trucked them over, and they would crane them in like a chest of drawers. They'd stick each room into the building. So the rooms were already built, walls and everything, and then they'd put the rooms in there. And actually, because they built it this way, a lot of people thought that the idea was that they could then replace the rooms over time. But that was never the idea. They said, any architect would say that, the building, the way, once it settles, you can't start pulling parts of the building. It's not a Jenga tower that you can move things in and out of. But there's the Contemporary when it was mostly built, and here's some more construction photos. It's really neat. Life magazine went there, and they took like these photos, and it's just amazing to see what this place looked like with just trucks sitting out there, cement mixers all just laid out in front of Cinderella Castle. One of the things that was on the property there was a 100-year-old tree, and they wanted to keep it. It actually got damaged. Because it was going to get torn out. Everything was getting torn out. And they found this tree. They thought it was beautiful and an old tree. And so they actually had, and I don't know a lot about botany, so I don't know exactly how this works, but they took another tree and merge the 2 trees together, because I guess if you take a healthy tree and you plant them next to each other, they'll grow into each other, and then the healthy tree will help the older tree live longer. And so they did that, and that tree is still there today. It's the Liberty Tree in front of the Liberty Tree Tavern. It's a huge old tree. Now, Walt died before they finished the Florida park. So before it was ready, he died. His brother Roy came out of retirement. gave a speech with Mickey Mouse because he wanted everything. And Roy died not long after. I mean, this was, the very end of Roy's life. He came there. It opened. It was a big deal. And unlike California, they kind of learned from all their mistakes. And the grand opening was a pretty spectacular, wonderful event. I'm just going to show you what was open on opening day because not everything was. You had Main Street USA, you had the trains. The train went around and the Dapper Dans were on there. Over in Fantasyland, you got Dumbo, you got Peter Pan, It's a Small World, and you got your King Arthur Carousel as well as the teacups. Over in Adventureland, Jungle Cruise, of course, which originally when they were making Jungle Cruise, it was intended to be a serious exploration. The idea was closer to Kilimanjaro safaris that they have today, but the animatronics, they're never going to be as realistic as having an actual lion there. And so they kind of hammed it up, which made it a lot more fun. Swiss Family Treehouse, which is still there. You can still walk through that. And then the Enchanted Tiki Room, which was, Walt had this idea for these animatronic birds. He wanted it to be a restaurant. They started it in Florida, and he actually had figured out a way to have the animatronic work with somebody talking into a microphone, and so the bird could actually speak right to you. And they've kind of done this now today in different ways with things like the Turtle Talk with Crush, where they can interact directly with you. Frontierland, pretty desolate. They just had the Shootin' Arcade and the Country Bear Jamboree. Country Bear Jamboree originally was made for a resort that they were working on. Disney had put a lot of money into this Salt Creek or whatever resort that they were going to build, and they ended up not building that. They had a lot of trouble with licensing and local government. That's really a big part of his story, which continues today. He's having problems with the government, or not Walt now, but the company is having problems with the government of Florida. There is a lot of massaging the elected officials you have to do. They said in the old days, in the 50s, Walt would just have a guy show up with a suitcase full of money if they needed to do something. And, like they'd have some kind of problem and, oh, we don't have the permit for this. Oh, no problem. We have a suitcase full of little permits with the number 100 on them. Okay, yeah, no, that's all we need. Yeah, that'll be perfect. Liberty Square had the Hall of Presidents, and so back then, when it first opened, Richard Nixon was the president of the United States. So he was the last one that was said, which I always tell people when they're like, Hall of Presidents, the president is too controversial. I'm like, it started with Richard Nixon. Like, that was literally the last one that they would say back then. So it's always been controversial. Another attraction, like the Jungle Cruise, that kind of splits between being funny and serious, Haunted Mansion. If you go on that, they had two concepts behind it. One was to make it fun and silly, and one was to make it scary, and they kind of went with kind of a mix of both, and so you kind of get the different vibe. Now, Tomorrowland just had the Speedway. It was all that was ready on opening day. Tomorrowland also had trouble on opening day in Disneyland. In Disneyland, they didn't have time to landscape it. So Walt sent people out with little signs with the scientific name of the weeds that were growing in the different flower pots. And so they just put little tiny signs. And so people go, oh, that's very interesting. Very educational. Here is some of the items that were added shortly after. So like the day after they opened, the Mark Twain was open. So the Mark Twain just wasn't ready day one. And then you got the train station in Frontierland opened a year after the park. And some of the other things, you can see Tom Sawyer Island was a little later. And then they opened their very famous golf resort. Milo, have you ever been inside of Shades of Green?
Yes.
How'd you get in?
A friend of mine was getting married.
Yeah, I've never been in there. So the golf resort, they opened it as the golf resort. Now today is called Shades of Green, and you have to be a member of the military to stay there. And they actually, your price to stay there is based on your rank. So the higher your rank, the more you have to pay. Because the idea is, if you're a 2-star general, you got a lot more money than a private, so a private gets a better deal on his room. So is anybody in the military here?
I just got out like 3 months ago.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your service. I think that's notable. Have you ever been to Walt Disney World?
No, I haven't.
All right. Well, here's the thing. When you go, you got to invite me because I want to come see your room at Shades of Green. Pirates of the Caribbean did not open with the park and didn't open for a few years. And the reason was they were building this park and they said, you know what? New Orleans and pirates and all that stuff, that's very local to Florida. People in Florida aren't going to want to look at attractions that have anything to do with their state and their area. It's just like a historic thing about this area. It's otherworldly for people in California, but we don't need it here. And everybody got there and was like, yeah, where's that Pirates of the Caribbean we always heard about? And then after that, Disney actually made a park in California about California. So they've totally backtracked on that idea. Does anybody have any questions before we go any further? I hear some murmuring, and I bet there are some questions. Anybody want to tell me things I got wrong yet? No, thank goodness. You guys are nice. All right, got a few more here. Discovery Island. Discovery Island was a place that's closed now. This is the one that people have swam to. I don't know if you follow stuff online. For years, people would swim over to it, and it was a neat place. They actually had there was a bird called the dusky seaside sparrow, that the last one that ever existed was at Walt Disney World at Discovery Island. And the name of the bird was Orange Band because of this orange band on its leg. And I read a tribute to this bird, and some woman wrote a beautiful poem. And it was all about how this bird was the last of his kind, and he didn't know it. But his head was heavy and his heart wasn't working as well. And it was time for him to go. And he went, not knowing there would never be another. And I read this, I got tears in my eyes reading about this bird. And then the next thing I click, and it's a picture of the bird in a bag at like the Smithsonian. Like, you know, the dead bird, put it in a bag, saved it. And that's kind of depressing. So now I'm really, really sad. And I typed dusky seaside sparrow into Google Images and see what it looks like. And then I click on the Wikipedia page and it says dusky seaside sparrow, last one ever, died out in Walt Disney World. And then there's a link and you can click and you can see more about seaside sparrows, because the dusky seaside sparrow went extinct. And I gotta tell you, I could never tell the difference between one of those dusky seaside sparrows and any of the other seaside sparrows. So I think we're all right. I hope we don't kill off any more seaside sparrows, but I think we're okay without that one. Here's a couple more construction pictures that happened later. This is when they built Space Mountain. Here's where they built Spaceship Earth, which that is the thing I overhear the most, is people looking for Space Mountain or Spaceship Earth at the wrong park. And I'm sure, because I've been there when somebody's like, where's Space Mountain? And the woman's like, you're at Epcot, sir, there's no Space Mountain here. And I'm like, dude, are you talking about the big ball? It's that one. It's they're like, oh yeah, that's what I heard. It was yeah. You go through time, right? Yeah. You look at a weird animation, a jib jab animation for 10 minutes at the end of the ride. That's it. Here's some construction pictures of Epcot, and we got 2 minutes. I got some good ones. We'll speed through these. This is the construction of World of Motion, which then became Test Track. And you can see in the background what became Guardians of the Galaxy. They had to expand the monorail out there. I got a quick monorail story, and I'll leave you with this. I'll leave you with one thing after this, but I got a quick monorail story. When the monorail opened at Disneyland, they had a big opening day, a big ribbon cutting, and they had the Vice President of the United States, who was a very good friend of Walt Disney's, Richard Nixon. Now, for all you may think about Nixon, if you didn't know it, you'd be surprised to find out the man loved theme parks. He loved Disneyland. He loved Epcot later. But he loved going to Disneyland. He was a good friend of Walt's, and he would go all the time. And so he was going to cut the ribbon with his family and with Walt for this new monorail. Not this one, but the one in California. And so he gets there. Secret Service is there with the Vice President. Vice President's there with his friend Richard Nixon. The press is all there. Everybody's clapping. They cut the ribbon. If you've ever seen the video, the ribbon won't cut, and they have to kind of rip it. And then Walt Disney says to Richard Nixon, hey, do you want to take a look inside? And Richard Nixon goes, yeah, of course. And he goes in, and he shows him how it works. And then Walt goes, do you want to go for a ride? And Nixon says, sure. And Walt shuts the door and takes off with the Vice President of the United States leaving Secret Service on the platform. And they said Secret Service panics. And they're like, where does this thing end? Is there a way to get off? Can anybody get on? What's going on with this? And they're all talking into their wrists and they're shouting. And they're like, Walt Disney has kidnapped the Vice President of the United States. Guys, it just goes in a circle. It'll be right back. All right. So I'm leaving you with that. But visually, I want to leave you with a good image. So it's Donald Duck in his Epcot attire with Chip in his Epcot attire, and these really creepy It's a Small World-esque characters that they used to have in Epcot. Look, this child has to be as terrified as any child could be. Hey, that's me. That was me when I was little, in my little bucket hat. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm on YouTube every day, 2 o'clock, brand new video. It's called Pointless Nostalgia. Please subscribe. If you come to my table, I've got free stickers. If you subscribe, if you comment, and if you like a video, you can get 3 pretty awesome stickers. These are high quality stickers. Usually I sell them for thousands of dollars. These are made of the same material that stickers would be made of if they put them on the spaceship. They don't put stickers on the spaceship, but if they did, if NASA wanted to put a sticker on one of those new shuttles, if Elon Musk wanted to put a sticker on that SpaceX thing, he'd use this quality of sticker. That's how good they are. So come to my table. I'm behind Barbara Dunkelman and in between Andy Merrill and Dana Snyder. So and come to wrestling tonight, 5 o'clock, FSCW. All right. Anything else? Any questions? Yes. All right. Well, thank you guys. You guys are awesome. I'm so glad you guys were here. Enjoy the rest of the con, and hopefully I'll see you soon.